Hello and welcome to The Punch. I'm David Penberthy, and this is the first edition of The Punch on Sky News from the website of the same name. Joining me today is Punch Deputy Editor Tori Maguire and Punch Sports columnist, Daily Telegraph Chief of Staff Luke McElveen. And in our Canberra Bureau, we're joined by the Minister for Sport, Kate Ellis. Now, in a week that's been again marred by allegations of bad player behaviour, we'll start in Canberra with you if we can, Kate. Now,
Certainly. We
obviously can't go into the specifics of the case against Melbourne Storm player Greg Inglis, but both as the Sports Minister and also, I guess, primarily as a sports fan, it does feel a bit like a case of here we go again, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it does, David, and you're right, we can't really talk about the specifics of that one incident, but I think that we've seen enough of a pattern that what we can say is that every time one of these incidents hits the front pages and sport moves from the back of the paper to the front for the wrong reasons, it's not just hurting that player, it's not just hurting that club, but it's actually hurting sport as a whole. And that's a reason why I think we really do need to take a strong stand in speaking out about just how unacceptable this sort of behaviour is.
You know, Kate, you wrote a terrific column for our website, The Punch, yesterday, where you identified this mindset, which you identified as the let boneheads be boneheads maxim.
That's the official terminology, yes.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure if it constitutes parliamentary language, but it was a terrific piece all the same. But, I mean, are you saying that there seems to be this mindset among fans and probably also some sports administrators where, look, you know, boys will be boys, you know, things like this are always going to happen? And do you think that view is of itself perhaps almost just as dangerous as the actual behaviour that we've seen from some of the players?
Yeah, I mean, I know that sports administrators have spoken out and taken a strong position on this, but I was thinking about it, and some of the emails that I get or correspondence that I get from sports supporters who I think that they're doing a favour for their heroes or for their team when they try and defend them when there's these sorts of allegations. Don't recognise that that's actually not about loyalty and you're not doing a favour for sport. If you want to do something good for sport, then let's speak out against these things and instead focus on the positive. And I've got to say, as a supporter of the mighty Adelaide Crows, I've seen a little bit of this from the other side of the fence when earlier this year one of our star players was charged with assaulting his girlfriend. And I can see how it's the natural behaviour of a sports fan to automatically, you defend your team, you defend your players when, you know, opponents are abusing them in the crowd or the like, you jump to their defence. So it's quite confronting when people that normally you would do anything to support, you've actually got to stand up and say, well, you know, I like you, I hope you do well on field, whatever, but I'm still going to say that what you did was horrific, there is never an excuse for it, and we're speaking out against it. And that's what I think we've got to do more of as supporters of sport. Yeah,
sure. Look, I might get our panel involved now if I could, Minister. Now, Tors, you're not what I would regard as a sports tragic. I don't see you running around the office like I do, crying or punching the air.
Shirt over my head.
Yeah, that's right. But how do you, and particularly not being tokenistic, but as a woman, how do you feel about the conduct of the actual codes themselves? You know, the conduct of people like Demetriou, the conduct of people like David Gallop at the NRL. It does seem sometimes like, cue the tape, here they come again for a bit of ritualistic head shaking about the latest atrocity.
Sometimes it almost feels like Gallop, Demetriou and John O'Neill sort of went to the Bob Carr School of Crisis Management, because what they do is they're the very respectable, articulate face of what is sometimes a very grubby, nasty story. So something horrendous will happen, you know, usually every 6 weeks, and they'll come out and they'll stand there and they'll look down the barrel of the camera and they'll say, as a father and as a husband, I'm very upset about this, I'm very angry about this, and the buck stops here. And then there they are again 6 weeks later having to say exactly the same thing. And look, the codes have all made a big effort with things like education programs and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't seem to be achieving anything. And you've got to wonder whether what they need to do now is just have a completely zero tolerance approach to this and just go, you know what, Greg Inglis, you're not training this week.
And Luke, I thought this morning in the Daily Telegraph on the Greg Inglis case, and again without getting into the specifics of the allegations against him, It was a fascinating read about his life in Melbourne. You know, this young guy from Kempsey, he's moved down to Melbourne, he's being paid $700,000 a year, I believe. But he's living in Altona, which, with respect to any people from Altona who are watching, is hardly what you'd call a dress circle suburb. He's living in this street that's got shopping trolleys everywhere. It's one of the most impoverished parts of Melbourne. And look, you read a story like that and you think maybe this is a bit of an example of a guy who has come from a background of poverty. He's got more money than he knows what to do with. And, you know, to some extent, should we perhaps cut the players a little bit of slack sometimes even because of the difficulty they face adjusting to this newfound wealth and fame?
It's a really interesting point. I mean, it has been made before that you know, kids are uprooted at a particular age. They're taken out of their the social setting that they feel comfortable in. I don't think you can ever use that as an excuse. But the Inglis example is a really interesting one, because here's a guy, the Greg Inglis we know as rugby league fans, and I know as a rugby league fan, is a guy who's nothing short of a freak on the field. He can do anything. He's a Superman. He gets around when we see him off the field, usually with diamond studs in both ears. It's the whole sort of NBA, NFL, you know, flashy, plenty of money, plenty of success. But when we went out there yesterday, our reporter Andrew Webster found something completely different. He described it as the best house in one of the worst streets in Melbourne. There is a reason why Greg Inglis has chosen this neighbourhood to live in, and it seems, according to from what the neighbours say, is that he likes the anonymity. He likes to be somebody who can come home. Nobody asks him. Nobody suspects he's a superstar. Nobody in the street really realised that he was Greg Inglis, the Queensland State of Origin enforcer. So it is an interesting study as far as he's concerned. He came from Bowraville up near Kempsey. He clearly doesn't feel comfortable in that sort of in the St Kilda or Tarak environment where you might find an AFL player. And he's a 22-year-old bloke who has obviously been forced to try and grow up fast, but clearly hasn't, given what we've seen this week. And it says something, I think, about the confusion personally that he's going through.
Kate, I might just cross back to you in Canberra, if I could. Your former leader, the man who dare not speak his name, Mark Latham, he made, I thought, a really good point some years ago in a column that he wrote for the Daily Telegraph, where he was talking about the lack of male role models for a lot of young kids in the poorer parts of Australia, and the way the family problems that they had grown up with manifested themselves in bad behaviour at school, and also in cases like we've seen in sport, you know, in the sporting arena. Do you think that maybe much more could be done to look at mentoring systems and buddying systems, and trying to make sure that these young guys who do find themselves in that kind of a situation have a bit more guidance from older men who have got their act together?
Yeah, I do think that it's really important that when there are, I guess, senior male mentors around the club, that they're reinforcing the sorts of behaviour that are appropriate, and not putting out this attitude that, oh, there's a culture of this within the sport, it's always happened and it's okay. So I think there are enough men around sporting clubs. It's about making sure that they are emphasising positive standards of behaviour. And I'm not going to use this opportunity, David, to have one of my hobby horse rants about women in sport, although I'm sure I'll be serving that up to the punch very, very soon.
We look forward to it.
But I would say, just looking at the sort of messages that people are getting around the clubs, I think another thing that is really important is that we need to have women within these sporting clubs as well. We need to have women in positions that are respected, and leadership positions, whether that's sitting on boards, whether that's in a whole range of different issues. We've got a long way to go in sport to make sure that that sport is respectful of women, and making sure that there are some positive, strong examples of women around the place, I think would have a very good impact on some of these blokes as well.
Yeah, there was one line in your column that I had to disagree with, when you did say that sports administrators do not condone bad player behaviour. I mean, I would have thought that after the Brett Stewart case at Manly, when they had the extraordinary general meeting to discuss the Stewart issue, one of the board members turned up at the meeting 3 days after the incident and was so drunk that he had to leave, and also the John Elliott case at Carlton earlier this year. I mean, in a way, I mean, some of this modern behaviour is perhaps long-standing old behaviour that has now only emerged because of the money that they're paid and the more intense media scrutiny.
Yeah. I guess the point I was trying to make, and I hate that you would disagree with me on a line, David, but I reckon we can come to an agreement on this one. The point that I was actually making was, I mean, I look at David Gallop and the way that he's dealt with this and the very strong statements and actions he's put in place, and I think he's been very clear about the fact that he's not going to accept this. What we now have to do is back that in at a club level and at a community level as well. And I guess that's the point that I was making, in that you're right. Sometimes I don't think that clubs do take this as seriously as they should, and I think that we've got to start looking at that level, and we've also got to start looking at the community. That what we're talking about is cultural change. We're looking at saying these things might have happened for a long time, but it's not acceptable, and sport is going to be a positive part of the community who's going to set a good example, and that means we've got to speak out against it rather than trying to jump to the defence of our role models who are doing indefensible things at times.
Yeah, sure. I might just throw back to the panel too, Kate. Picking up on the point that the Minister made about the lack of women administrators, the AFL has Sam Mostyn, who's a terrifically respected woman as a commissioner, successful business background and political background. The NRL has Katie Page from Harvey Norman. But do you think, and maybe this is for you, Tors, I mean, are they sort of the official one woman in residence?
You know, the nice faces of the codes. Look, I think it's really difficult for those women to actually have an impact on the day-to-day behaviour. They're all fantastic and everything they say. And Sally Lone has also joined the New South Wales Rugby Union, I think. And, you know, they can stand up there and say, this is enough, had enough, and it's the people that are around them every day. And, look, I think it's really interesting that so many of these blokes actually do cope really well. They get thrown in the deep end and they get paid a fortune for what is effectively a part-time job. They have young women around them all the time throwing themselves at them, and most of them actually cope. And so maybe some of the responsibility could be put on their shoulders in, you know, helping their teammates deal with it.
Well, and Luke, your take on it, I mean, you're a Roosters fan. You had a bit of a go at your former coach, Brad Fittler, in a Punch column the other day. I mean, do you agree with Tors that there's a need for perhaps a more permanent female presence in the way some of these clubs are run, as opposed to the roll them out for the breast cancer fundraiser and the more tokenistic stuff that we see? Yeah,
definitely. It broke my heart to go after Freddie Fittler in that column, because he was one of my sort of childhood heroes on the field. But I think as a boss, using his example, and he is the boss now. Well, until he's next year he won't be, but up until then he was the coach of the club, and it set a poor example. He was accused of going to a hotel room drunk in North Queensland the day before a game and knocking on the door of a woman who then called the police. We never learned the full details of it, but it's not a great example to set. So when you've got guys at that end of the sport not setting an adequate example, you can't expect 18-year-olds to behave any differently.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, look, we're going to take a short commercial break, but we'll be back with more after this on The Punch.